Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Frontline Club for this discussion on rebuilding Libya. We've got a star-studded cast of 5 guests, but star-studded they may be, but we're going to be brisk and brutal and ask everybody to speak just for a couple of minutes to set out what they think are the principal issues that we want to talk about this evening, bearing in mind that you will probably want to ask lots of questions as well. Why am I here? I'm here because I suppose I visited Libya 3 times in the course of the last year, and what a dramatic year it's been. We're of course coming up to the first anniversary of the Benghazi uprising. Today, is it in fact? Today? Today, the 15th. Yeah. The first anniversary, amazingly, of one of the salient events of the extraordinary year that are we still calling it the Arab Spring? For the purposes of the moment, let's still call it the Arab Spring. But obviously the Libyan revolution and the overthrow of Gaddafi after 42 years has got to be one of its most salient events, but there's no question that there are huge challenges and difficulties ahead. And I think we should, without further ado, ask our speakers to begin with Ahmed Gibril, who's the deputy head of the Libyan embassy in London. He was a political advisor to the chairman of the National Transitional Council and the spokesperson for the Libyan Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the revolution. So Ahmed, please, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you all for coming. I will start by what we discussed just before we came here, when Ian mentioned that almost every Libyan he talked to in Libya was delighted by the international intervention. And I would really like to comment on this because this needs to be clarified. I remember when the revolution started in Libya, we all were saying we are against any international intervention. This is a Libyan issue and this should be resolved by Libyan. But after we saw how Gaddafi reacted to the event, we realized that if there was no international intervention, a massacre would be committed in Libya. Though we were still saying we can accept, or we would accept, international intervention limited to no-fly zone and some airstrikes, but we would never accept any troops on the ground. I want to make clear that the Libyan people were not very happy with what happened with regard to the military actions took place in Libya. We all hoped the revolution would succeed peacefully and we will have peaceful transition in Libya like the one took place in Tunisia. But unfortunately, this was not the case, and I think the only one who could be blamed is Gaddafi himself. The current situation and the future, I always prefer, when it comes to international affairs, I always prefer the comparative approach. There's no standards in international affairs, and if we compare Libya today to other countries who have experienced a civil war, I think the situation in Libya is remarkably stable. If we compare Libya, for example, to Somalia, to Iraq, many of you have been in Libya. You can walk in the streets in any city of Libya, and there is no threat, no harm. We hear about some clashes here and there. I think they are normal, they are expected. But still, the situation is still very, very stable. We have more than 200,000 pieces of weapons in Libya, but you don't hear any incidents, or you don't hear many incidents. You hear it once in a very long while, and it's always dealt with in a very responsible manner by the people and by the authority in Libya. Also, again, when it comes to human rights, I would like also to use the comparative approach again. The people in Libya are not very, or not really knowledgeable about human rights concept. And we heard some complaints. We heard, or we saw some reports recently, and the authority in Libya is not denying that there was or there have been some violations of human rights in Libya. In fact, it has been condemned by the authority, by the NTC, by the transitional government. And I think the NTC have been doing their best to deal with this issue. They've been very responsible. And if we compare the human rights in Libya to some other countries, for example, Iraq or Afghanistan, human rights organizations, Amnesty International, for example, Human Rights Watch, have been given full access to detention centers in Libya. This didn't happen in Iraq, didn't happen in Abu Ghraib, didn't happen in Bagram in Afghanistan. And also they've met with the highest authority in Libya, which means the authority is realizing how important, how crucial this issue is, and they are willing and ready to deal with the international community to resolve this problem. I know I don't have much time. Let me say at the end the challenges ahead. Some people think it's the security, some people think it's the economic, but I think the main challenges are for the NTC and for the government are the high expectation of the Libyan people and how the Libyan people will practice democracy in the future, since they have not practiced democracy for the last 4 decades. I think I'll stop here, Ian.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you under the gun. So you say that Libya is remarkably stable. You've raised the issue of human rights, and we're going to hear later from Carsten Jorgensen from Amnesty. But now, Faraj Najm, you're a writer and historian, so you're well placed to give us a sense of perspective, perhaps, on after 42 years of Gaddafi rule, the Jamahiriya, the famous state of the masses. Libya is in a new situation now. Are you as optimistic as Ahmed Gibril sounds at this stage, a year from the uprising?
Well, I have to be, as a Libyan, we have no choice but to be optimistic and to look forward to the future. I've been going back and forth to Libya since the mid-90s, so I'm well placed to pass a judgment. Libya in the last year or so has changed dramatically to the better. Libyans are very delighted, as Ahmed said, to see an end to a vile regime that has no respect for, let alone human rights, for Libyan dignity. However, there are lots of teething problems. There are challenges ahead Libyans need to deal with. Libyans are, with the help of the international community, are encountering some of these problems, and we've seen some concrete steps. To name a few, we've seen the Constitution Declaration, and they stuck by it. I was one of those who served in the Commission for Support and Advice to the NTC. Our legal committee did present that constitution. We also saw the passing of the election law only a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So we are sticking by the agenda that the Libyans have drawn up for themselves. It isn't all good in the sense that one must be complacent. There are challenges and there are serious problems. To name a few, I think the first is to deal with Gaddafi loyalists, especially those who are outside the country, namely the family, and the one to watch out for particularly is the daughter, who's going to cause lots of problems. These people, they have the connections, they have the money, and also they're angry about what happened to them, because now they've been deprived of their little empire forever, hopefully. the other category or the other people that we need to deal with, and we have to do it gently. Those who served with Gaddafi and they did prop up his regime, but they joined in the fray on the side of the revolutionaries, and these people, they need to be extricated, but they need to be this needs to be done gently. So we don't want the infamous de-Baathification of Iraq, but in the same time, these people must understand that they did not serve Gaddafi well, and I don't think they're going to serve us well either, and therefore they have to make way. But we need to gently convince them that they have to make room for aspiring Libyans who wanted to serve their country. After all, this revolution, which was unthinking of, it's a dream. It was delivered by young men who almost had nothing to do with the regime and were seen as powerless. However, they managed to give a big blow to the regime. The third category that we need to keep an eye on, they are much less dangerous than the first two, and these the ones that I call the zealots or the extremists, whether the tribalists or the regionalists or the Islamists or the liberalists. And these people, we need to keep an eye on them, because we don't want them to cause us any problems, especially now when we are coming together as Libyans to heal our wounds, to rebuild Libya, and we can't really afford to have any phrase, even though we do welcome debates, and there are serious debates in Libya. There are serious disagreements. Libyans now, they breathe freedom. They speak democracy. There are petitions. There are demonstrations in the streets. There are major disagreements with the government, with the NTC, but luckily this is all done peacefully, and hopefully we're going to keep it this way.
Thank you very much, Faraj. Now, a vile regime that's gone, teething problems, but quite a lot to be optimistic about. Rana, you're, I think, unique on this platform. You lived for the last 7 years in Tripoli, obviously in difficult circumstances in much of the last year, but you're not Libyan, you're British, Lebanese, and you've been working for the BBC for not all of that time, because you had to take an enforced holiday, I guess, because of the circumstances. But perhaps you could talk a little bit about how, with your perspective, you see things now, a year on from the revolution.
Thank you for the introduction. This is quite new to me, because I'm usually on the other side where Ian is sitting asking the questions. I'm tempted to interview you right now, but I think with my own experiences of the last, it's actually been 8 years now, things are very different on the ground in Libya. It was almost impossible to do my job for the BBC the first 7 years I was there, and there are stark differences now. People are open to talking, people want to be interviewed, so it's very refreshing to have that. Having said that, I think there are a lot of problems that authorities need to start addressing, and I'm here more to reflect, I think, on what people feel on the ground. It's partly my job. It actually is my job, but things like security are issues that need to be addressed immediately. We can talk about democracy, but I think it's a very vague term for a lot of Libyans at the moment. There are some who will argue that people are ready for it and they are politically mature, and that there's a vast educated class there. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't understand what democratic values are in the country. It's partly, I think, why we are seeing what Amnesty International and other human rights groups like Human Rights Watch are talking about, which is the rampant violations of human rights and detainees. I think in the medium term, we can't say short term, because it will take time for that to happen. Power needs to be centralized. Yes, you do have an NTC and there's an interim government, but overall, a lot of people don't feel that they're actually in charge. It is the militias that are running things. It's slightly chaotic, or I should say it's quite chaotic, if I don't want to be very politically correct. And these are matters that need to be addressed, I think, before the Libyan government can look forward to a proper democratic process in the future and for it to actually work. People are complaining of a lack of transparency in the country, lack of money. A lot of the fighters that took part in the uprising feel that they've been marginalized since the end of the war. So it would be interesting to hear what some of you have to say on the matter, because they feel they haven't been paid, for example. And I think overall, whether it was in the book I recently authored or my own experiences on the ground, overall I am optimistic of the journey Libyans will take, but I don't doubt for a second that it will be extremely difficult. And I think anyone who thinks that it will happen in the next year or two is quite delusional. And I'm sorry to say that if it offends anyone, but I think it's a very long process and it's going to take a long time. But ultimately, it seems like Libyans are striving for it. So a lot of people are hoping that it will work out in the end.
Rana, thank you very much. So that leaves us with a very good question, I think, to ask our next speaker, Khairi Abu Shagar, who's a media researcher, political activist, and human rights defender. And I would like to ask very directly a political question. A lot of people say of Libya, and Rana's just reflected on that very usefully, that it's all happening too fast, that after 42 years of being completely unfree, to go in the space of a few months to elections, a new constitution, with all the existing problems, is simply too fast. Is that right?
It's actually unreal, almost. Yes, thank you very much, Ian. Let me try and put this into context. I mean, this time last year, I was in Dakar in Senegal attending the World Social Forum. And on the 11th of February, Mubarak fell. Everybody was talking about Egypt, Tunisia. There was nobody dreaming of talking about Libya. And then things happened in Libya. But why? The reasons the Libyans made the revolution essentially to recover their dignity, to recover their worth of being as a human beings. And that's why the whole country united in getting rid of Gaddafi and his regime. They had a focus, they had a target to achieve, and they managed to achieve it with the help of the international community. Early March, I was one of those who campaigned for international intervention at the House of Parliament, at the European Union, at many other places. And without the international community, the Libyans would not have been able to achieve what they have achieved. So I think the international community have an obligation to see this through, that the Libyans actually do establish a proper state that respects human rights and that works for the well-being of all Libyans. Having said that, I have to, unfortunately, of course I am happy and I have to be optimistic and all that, but reality sometimes hits us in the face. I mean, Ahmed Gibril, the ex-prime minister, a few days ago, said Libya today has no state it's not a functioning state, has no functioning army, no proper army, no proper police, and the militias run the show in Libya. Human rights abuses are rampant all over the country, and that is the reality, that is a fact. Now, does this compare with what used to happen at the time of Gaddafi? There are comparisons to be made. The Libyans are free to talk and free to express themselves to a certain extent. The culture that thrived in 42 years of dictatorship of Gaddafi is one where Libyans were denied some of the basic elements of social development and cultural development. And this meant that Libyans have a problem recognizing difference, have a problem, in general, of course, seeing the other way. So it is a closed conservative society. And people had no option but to be like that, because Gaddafi prevented them from opening up to the world. The country was closed, almost like a jail for the whole, for a very long time. So Libyans are happy that now that Gaddafi is gone, but there's, as Rana rightly said, there's a hell of a lot of work that needs to be done to straighten up things. And I think there are lots of Libyans who are very optimistic and extremely and prepared to work extremely hard to make this right. But I think the elite, the educated, especially those who lived in the West and saw democracies function, because democracy is not just elections. We can't just create a democracy out of the blue by holding elections and we say we have a democratic state and democratic country. I think it's a much more broader, much more deeper than that. And if we recognize that, we know what the obstacles that we have to solve. We can solve them. But if we deny, if we live in a state of denial that these problems don't exist, I think that we won't move very forward.
Harry, thank you very much. Now, Carsten Jorgensen is the Libya researcher for Amnesty International. Every speaker, I think, has mentioned the question of human rights. I know you've just published a report, I think is out tomorrow. Yeah. Perhaps we could just have a little overview of that, and I think in the fairly certain knowledge that we'll return to the subject during the questions. So just, if you would, thank you.
Yeah,
Carsten.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to go back just to my own perspective on Libya. I was a Libya researcher more than 10 years ago in the late 90s, when initially we couldn't go to the country to conduct research. I also took part in a mission where research was practically not possible because there was so much monitored, so it was impossible to talk to people freely. And that's what we normally need as an environment to conduct our research. So I was very much delighted when or last year already, I was able to come to Libya and also to experience the new spirit, civil society. All of a sudden you had various non-governmental organizations who formed themselves, and including in the area of human rights. And I have to say, I very much also admire those people who are now working on very sensitive issues, because during the first visit in September, our experience was that, it was my first visit in September. Obviously, colleagues had been there already from February, March, and so on. So I only went to Libya first time in September. And that people, when we went in September, what we experienced, that we of course looked at the not so happy side of the country already at that time. When we went to detention centers and saw what happened there in abuses, what struck us was that those who committed abuses were quite open about what they did. And people told us, yes, of course I beat him because he has to tell me where his weapons are. And you say, so how do you know that he has got weapons at all? And so, we know. And again, now we've been there the last since mid-January. My colleague just came back from Libya yesterday. I returned earlier this month. And again, as mentioned also before, access to anyone, to civil society activists, to the government representatives, to militia people, to detention centers, was not difficult. Perhaps it was difficult to find certain places of detention which are kept secret. So these we wouldn't have seen, though we made an effort to find also places which are not so easily accessible. And you probably have seen what we put out at the end of January already, preliminary findings of our visits to detention centers, mainly in and around Tripoli and in and around Misrata, where we've seen horrific horrific injuries of detainees who had been battered by all sorts of instruments, people who had been electroshocks, as they told us. And of course, we raised this with those who were holding them. These were, I should say, all centers under the control of militias, so not prisons or other facilities under the control of the judicial authorities. And those in charge of the detention centers would possibly admit to some incidents of abuse, but would not admit that it happened at such a large scale, which we saw, which many others observed, and we're just about to release a report which will be available tomorrow, where we document many, many cases, including cases where people have died under torture. And we've spoken to relatives of these people who died under torture, and of course they are upset that nothing happens, that maybe with the exception of a few high-profile cases, no investigations are conducted. The judiciary is totally weak. We speak to prosecutors and they say, yes, I can't go and interrogate a chief of militia. It's, they're holding the guns. They can't. And so this is very worrying, that the state is not able to protect citizens and not able to provide justice as required. Should I stop here?
Well, I think that's a very useful introduction to the subject, and I'm very conscious of the time, if that's all right. And so what I suggest we do is I will throw the floor open to questions. If you want to address a question to a specific member of the panel, please do so. But I think we should allow any member of the panel to respond. I wonder whether it would be useful to try and take questions in clusters of 3, something like that, just so that we can deal with them perhaps more efficiently. Does anybody object to that? If not, then let's do it like that. So I can see there's already a question from a gentleman here, so please. Do you like people to identify yourselves? I don't know. So please say who you are.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mundar Shahumi. I'm a Libyan citizen who's been in the UK for about 11 years now. My first is rather a comment rather than a question. For anyone who's saying the high expectations of Libyans, I would say that the Libyans have paid a high price for their freedom, and they shouldn't be told that your expectations are way too high for us to meet them. The Libyan observation so far is the performance of the government and the performance of the NTC is substandard in comparison to the expectation, in comparison to the aspirations of the Libyans. You look at the Libyan streets, they went out demonstrating, they understand what rights are, they understand what democracy are. They shouldn't be walked around and be told, oh, you shouldn't be expecting this is way too far, or you shouldn't be centralizing government, because people are the ones who made revolutions, not the NTC, it's not the government, it's the people. And they need to be respected and understood, and what they say should go on the ground. Now, the government not addressing the judicial situation is actually the government's fault and the NTC's fault, rather than getting involved in the battering within. So Libyans deserve all the expectations they have, and I think the NTC should really understand what they're doing before criticizing the Libyans for their expectations.
Okay, thank you. That was much more of a comment than a question. So let's try and just have things that sound more like questions, perhaps just at the beginning, okay? Lady here, please.
I'm Sarah Glazer. I'm a reporter for Congressional Quarterly in Washington, D.C., and I'm interested in what's happening to women's rights, particularly with the rise of Islamism, and talk about possibly liberalized attitudes towards polygamy. What's going to happen to women's rights in the new Libya?
Thank you. And one more. Let's have one more now, and then try and get a round of answers from the panel, who are all looking quite worried as far as I can see.
Hi, my name is Jude Leas, and I'm a British Libyan based here in the UK. My question is actually in relation to the issue of the judiciary. What do you think, or what do you expect to happen to the rule of law? Because many of the problems that have been raised here, especially in relation to men on the ground, men holding guns, they're in control. I feel that a lot of the solutions that to many of the problems that have been raised today come down to the implementation of the rule of law and the implementation of the court system and the judiciary as soon as possible. I'm a lawyer myself, and I see this as it should be the absolute priority of the Libyan government and the Libyan people. And I actually disagree with my very good friend Mundar Shahumi. To a very large extent, I do agree that Libyans paid a high price for this revolution, and they should do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, this is a country, and we need to stabilize it, and we need to maintain some type of control to prevent people like Amnesty International coming in and saying, oh, Libya needs a lot more help than it really does. So I think it's up to the Libyans to implement the rule of law as soon as possible to stop these problems. And my question is, what can be done, and how can we make this process come about a lot quicker?
Thank you. I don't know who wants to go first. Perhaps you'd like to, as you started and you represented the government view. Some quite difficult questions there.
Okay, I'll comment on your comments regarding the high expectation. What I meant is the timing. The Libyan, or some Libyan, think what prevented them from achieving what they've dreamed of is Gaddafi. And since Gaddafi is gone, then they can achieve all what they have dreamed of within days or weeks or months. This requires time. And I agree with you. The Libyan people are the ones who carried the revolution. The NTC was a part of it. We can't also ignore what the NTC, what the people in the NTC have done, the sacrifice they've paid. They are Libyans, and I think there deserve some respect and acknowledge of what they have done to their country.
It's the results that actually force respect, not request to be respected. That's
Sorry?
It's the results that speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should understand this. What the NTC inherited is a devastated country. The NTC has been established for less than a year ago with limited resources, and I myself think they've been doing their best. There is difficulties facing them. There is no doubt about it. They've not been very efficient, and this is not justified, but this can be explained because of what they inherited from the previous regime.
Please, whoever else wants to respond to any of these points and try to address all the questions. Please, yeah.
Two things. The revolutionaries often referred to negatively as militias, which the majority of Libyans resent because these young men, they're the ones who liberated the country, and they're the ones who gave hope to the nation to rise again. Yes, there are problems with them. There are fringes on the side who do commit human rights abuses, and which me and my colleague, we were in Al Jazeera English, and we spoke out against this, and we expressed our horror against that. But we must not forget that these men are doing wonders for the country. They're the ones who are maintaining the security. They're the ones who are helping to Libya as a state, but also as a people to realize their dream. This is largely unpaid voluntary work, but they need politicians to guide them, to lay down their arms and to go back to their jobs. So it isn't all bad. They're doing some good work.
Sorry, can I just? At that point, there was a very fine sentiment, but the fact is, there's supposed to be a plan to disarm and to integrate 75,000 Thawar, right, fighters, revolutionaries, militiamen, whatever you want to call them, into the army, the police, and into jobs, and that's not happening.
No, it is happening. Well, what happened? Recently there has been a commission has been set up to rehabilitate these warriors, these fighters. These kind of things, you need money to do them. yesterday, I think there was a deal between the Prime Minister and the head of this commission, who's an ex-revolutionary commander, Mustafa Sagizli, and I think they agreed the sum of $3 billion or dinar to rehabilitate 70,000 or so. But unless they have the money, unless they have the liquidity, they won't be able to do it. So there are plans. The other thing that the government needs to do is to activate its court system, as Jude said. There are lawyers and judges who are sleeping in their homes. I think they need to rise up to the occasion, and they need to come back to the courts, and they need to challenge these human rights abusers, and get the help of the Libyans in order to put this country straight. The other thing, the expectation, which Mundar rightly said, Libyans did the undoable. Libyans overthrew Gaddafi, that no one would dream to doing this. And Libyans now have vast imagination. You know, Libyans have become a bit like the American military breast. You know, they don't know where they're going, but they get there before everyone else. And this has become a guiding philosophy. And I remember I was in Benghazi just last month, and the newly elected Tunisian president, he came and he was begging them, and he said, please, you know, stop using the word now, because Libyans, they want everything now. They want democracy now, freedom now. And he said, you cannot just plant a palm tree and say, can I have dates now? He said, this is impossible. You need to be patient, and we need to sell this to Libyans. But Libyans rightly ask for this to be done now, because they have suffered for 4 decades. And they have the money, they have the brain power, they've got a small population, they've got the world on their side, and they have a right cause. Why can't they have? I think the government and the NTC, as my friend here said, they need to rise up to the occasion. But again, I don't blame them, the government and the NTC, because they're limited. The capacity is limited. They don't have the means, namely the money, which is still by and large frozen.
Ferry?
I think it's common knowledge these days that anybody who follows Libyan affairs would come up with the conclusion that the NTC's performed. There's a lot to be desired from the NTC, and the NTC has not really risen up to the occasion and the trust that the Libyan people have entrusted in them. The NTC is accused of lack of transparency, is lack of secrecy, of not properly communicating with the people, not properly getting in touch with the ordinary Libyans and feeling what exactly the needs are and addressing them. Of course, the NTC has done a great job at the time when there was a war. They did a lot, but for the NTC to actually enforce itself or get the trust of the Libyan people and get the belief that the Libyan people will actually go with them and whatever they're doing, they have to do a lot, and they are not actually doing that. When you see people flying on private planes from Tripoli or Benghazi to Washington just to pass on a message of thanks, people say, what's that? And then you hear some members of the NTC complaining about lack of funds and lack of money. There's a lot of money now, today, being squandered and being taken out of the country, and nobody is watching. Nobody knows what this today. Forget the billions that disappeared in the past. Whatever exists today in Libya is actually, there's rampant corruption. There's people who live in Tripoli, live in Benghazi, they are very angry. They don't think that the revolution that they sacrificed their blood for have given them much. Of course, people have to have patience and have to wait, but they have to see signs that give them promise that things will actually get better. Okay. I don't think they are seeing that.
I know Carsten wants to say a word, but can I note that nobody has yet addressed the very important questions of women's rights in the new Libya, the influence of Islamists, and the question of polygamy. So,
I'm not sure I going to start with that. No, I just want to first address the issue which was raised earlier, or by several people, the functioning of, or non-functioning of the judicial system and the role of the militia. And, this is a problem which is very much connected. The militias are taking on roles they shouldn't have. We've seen in detention centers where, whether we call them militia, Towada, or whatever we want to use as labels, but we've seen people who are affiliated with armed groups who are conducting confessions, conducting interrogation, and they force people into interrogation. They use all kind of means I described earlier to force people to confess, and this is all then written down in testimonies which are then fingerprinted, thumbed and signed. I imagine with the idea that these kind of documents could be used in a future trial. Of course, such a thing could never be used in a fair trial, and we've raised that on occasion. So a first step would be to make clear that no interrogations, should take place in any detention center which is not under the control of the authorities. And those who are conducting these interrogations should know that this is useless what they do. Then the second step, of course, would be to make sure that these detention centers are closed. I mean, I know that it's in the process, but it's a slow process. I know that authorities are now in control of, a number of detention centers, but there are also many militias who are not willing to let go those people they're holding. So it is a slow process, but I think the authorities, need to be very strong and decisive, or to make clear that this situation can't go on. It produces, new injustice. It's dangerous for the future.
Can I raise, hoping that we will come back to women and Islamists and so on, but can I raise a question that is relevant for the moment and perhaps ties a couple of strands together here? I think it's well known that Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi is still in the hands of the militia in Zintan, where he was taken when he was captured. And there's a very important, and everybody will know, I think, that he faces charges of crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Is it not a very important test for the new Libya as to what actually happens to Saif al-Islam? And would you not agree, I mean, to sound a bit parliamentary about it, would you not agree that it's not looking good, taken that he's still in Zintan, there's no sign of a trial taking place in Libya itself, nor is there any sign of a trial taking place under the auspices of the International Criminal Court? And that goes back to, a couple of you mentioned the question of Gaddafi loyalists, we heard Saadi in Niger threatening just a few days ago to start an uprising of loyalists in Libya. Isn't it a very important test of the post-Gaddafi Libya, how it deals with that very important and difficult legacy of the past? Not looking great, I would have to say.
It's an important test, and not only Saif al-Islam. There is more than 2,000 people held by the NTC, and they are treated well. They are in prisons, monitored by the NTC's authority. Saif al-Islam, actually we have people complaining about the way Saif al-Islam is treated. We have people from Zintan, from Misrata, are not happy with the way Saif al-Islam is treated. He eats with the people who are...
Pampered, well looked after.
Yeah. He has access to international organizations, Human Rights Watch, ICRC. He said himself, I have not been tortured and I have not seen any harm, and the people have treated me very well. And this is not the case with only Saif al-Islam. This is the case with more than 2,000 prisoners in some other places in Libya. Okay. Unfortunately, what the international organizations focus on are those few cases when people are tortured. This is unfortunate. The NTC is against it. The NTC is doing its best to prevent it. But it takes time. We should be pragmatic. The NTC, what's the NTC? The NTC, few people who gathered a year ago and created an authority in Benghazi. They didn't have established or organized army. they didn't have police, they didn't have proper institutions. And to establish all these, this takes time. And this is what the international community, what the Libyan people need to understand at this stage.
Okay, thank you. So should we have some more questions? And let's not forget the ones that have not been answered yet. Okay, so go over here with the mic, please.
We've talked a lot about expectations, just going back to this issue of expectations. I wanted to ask, disappointment with politicians is a feature of democracy, and there's bound to be lots more of that to come. But we talked about what the NTC are not doing. What can they be doing? What should they be doing prior to the elections, prior to the sort of political classes actually gaining a mandate in Libya? So what should they be doing? What do you expect of them?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. The area I want to talk about has been touched on, but I'd like to dig a little deeper on the sociological and psychological issues of the conflict. You have tens of thousands of young men and indeed boys that fought very hard for many months and were exposed to a great deal of difficult things. They're now being asked to go back to work, to go back to unemployment, and indeed to go back to school. I'd like to ask the panel what they think of how they see the concerns of post-traumatic stress disorder and also their change in status as they go back into civil society, and what indeed can be done about that.
Thank you. One more now. Oh, sorry.
Just wanted to ask how optimistic the panel is that the Libyan people in the forthcoming elections will have candidates that truly reflect their hopes for the future. And do you think the NTC are doing enough to ensure that there is a level playing field for these elections?
Thank you very much. So let's take those three together, maybe, and do a round. And there's some overlap, I think, between the questions. But whoever would like to, Rana, I see wants to speak.
I think
please.
I'll answer the lady about women's rights and their concerns. I think we have to be realistic about something, and that's that Sharia law has always been part of the Libyan constitution under the monarchy, as well as the subsequent Green Book ad hoc laws of Colonel Gaddafi when he was in power and alive. It's not new. I think part of the issue was when Mr. Mustafa Abdul Jalil mentioned it in that now infamous speech he made on the commemoration of the liberation of Libya. And he said polygamy is allowed, or something to that effect. And many people pounced on it. The fact of the matter is polygamy was not widespread under the Gaddafi regime, but it was practiced. Even though by law he had officially announced that it was illegal. A lot of people did practice it, but it wasn't rampant. I'm not saying it was rampant. I know you're shaking your head. I know a lot of Libyan women who are second and third wives.
They are, but they're a Maliki madhab, so you have to have the authorization of the previous wife before you go ahead. Well, they want people to be able to go and marry without getting previous. No, I'm not advocating this or that.
Yeah, I'm not advocating polygamy. On the contrary, if my husband wanted to remarry, I'd happily divorce him. And, but I love him, and I don't think he's going to do that. That's not the point. But it was practiced. It was practiced.
It was, but under a different madhab. It was a Maliki madhab, and now, which Gaddafi, this is the only law that I actually agree with. If you want to marry again, you have to get the official approval of your previous wife before you go ahead. Now, Mr. Abdul Jalil decided...
A lot of women would actually argue, we don't want them to be able to marry again.
Well, this is, okay, you have to you have to address the subject
well,
altogether.
Can we just go through the panel first and maybe come back to you afterwards? But Rana, have you finished? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, so we've please.
Polygamy was, I lived in Libya until 1992, 60s and 70s. Polygamy was practiced, was part of the culture, but it was on a very small and limited scale. It was never available to everyone. And I think I know from my mother and my relatives and all that, it's not something that is, especially in the city. I think in the countryside and the faraway places, it's a lot easier for men to marry more than one. But it was never a big problem. It existed. I think the stress on it now is just it begs belief. I don't know, the need for it. It's not necessary. But the issue is, I think, it's not.
But it was raised. Sorry, it was raised by Mustafa Abdul Jalil in a
I
very
don't,
important speech.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
In that speech, Abdul Jalil had been his advisors wrote a speech for him, and they trained him to deliver it. And when he got up to the podium, he kept the speech in his pocket, and he gave the speech he wanted to give. Okay.
And by the way, revolutionaries were going this, and when they heard this, and they were looking out at their wives, going like.
They changed. I think women in Libya in the 60s and the 70s, they had lots of rights. They were never, they were in the cities, especially in the cities I grew up in Tripoli. Libyan women were just like ordinary women in Egypt and Tunisia and North Africa. I think what changed is, I think, which affected the whole of the Middle East and North Africa, 1980s and 90s, the Islamization and the bringing in of a new culture, which is not actually, it's actually alien to this society. This is now what exists today. Now, women in Libya today are trying and working extremely hard to gain their rights, to preserve their rights, and to have a role and a say. And I think their campaign for the quotas and the laws of the election of the parliament and all that, that's a sign of success. But there's a lot to be desired yet, and I think the idea now that only Libya will be a functioning and a prosperous state if it has elections, and I think I will comment on the expectations of the elections, I think is wrong. Libyans need a lot to understand that to have a proper country and a state to live in peace and dignity and opportunity, they need more than just elections. They need to understand what it means to respect human beings, to respect the human rights, and to understand that people can be different and they can be from the same country, from the same nationality. People think the NTC commented when they first drafted the Constitutional Declaration last March. A German journalist asked them why you did not include clause for the freedom of thought and religion. They said, we don't need that because we are 100% Muslims. What do you mean? Of course, that's not true, but the society is pushed towards thinking that it's homogeneous, it's single faith, people don't have to look somewhere else. We have everything in Islam, we have everything in Sharia. It's not just that. A single school of Islam exists. But that's not true. And we can't, Libyans are the ones who suffered for 42 years because of one man wants them to think in one particular way. They should realize that with plurality, with multiculturalism, with the ability to think for yourself and choose your path that you want to do, that's how you become a proper human being, and you will have the opportunity to choose to go down the road you want to go. The elections, I think the NTC, everybody hopes that the elections, hopefully, will bring an end to the dysfunctioning NTC, and by that time the NTC should go, and the new elected, it's not actually government, they will elect a parliament, a legislative body which will have the responsibility of drafting the country's constitution. But the big problem is this constitution, if it's written and drafted to be a lasting constitution with clauses which make it very difficult to change, I think that's going to be a big problem, because the country is not ready yet for a proper constitution that cannot be changed in the future.
Okay, Zedvi, you want to comment on any other outstanding questions? We haven't, the guy asked about post-traumatic stress disorder for young fighters. We've talked about the difficulties of finding them jobs and integrating them into the police and the national army. That's something that you hope would be dealt with?
I think that's an issue which has been pushed in the back and needs to be brought to the forefront and to be dealt with. Yes, these young men so horror, especially when you see my own brother who had two of his mates flanking him. They were killed on the 20th of February, and he was shot himself. He said he survived, and these people need the attention that they deserve. However, this is not coming forth. But more persistently, I think those women who suffered rape, and this is something that Libyans do not want to talk about, and they cannot talk about openly. I mean, I was horrified when I thought initially there were 400 women were raped, but a psychiatrist in the name of Siham Sergewa stood up to Mustafa Abjelil in a gathering, and she said to him, there are 8,000 women who have been raped, but we cannot mention them, we cannot name them, we cannot even approach them. And I think we need a great deal of help. We need psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, the clergy, you name it. And we need to reinvent a culture whereby we need to talk openly about this sexual violence that these women suffered for no reasons, and deal with them. I know there are a number of them that they claimed their own lives because they couldn't face their menfolk. They couldn't go back and face their children or husbands or brothers. It's a horrible stuff. So yes, we need a great deal. But this is something I think we're not talking about. We're talking about more important things, we seem to be. So we need to rearrange our priorities. And this, I think, should be flagged and should come to the top. And we need to deal with.
Rana, please.
If I can add something. Personally, and these views do not represent the BBC, they represent my personal views, but I think overall, the entire population is probably suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress after the 42-year dictatorship of Colonel Gaddafi, and I don't speak out of experience. I think it's all well and good to be talking about what the problems are. We've highlighted it, and I don't have the answers because I'm just a journalist and an observer for the most part. But what is the NTC or others who are in charge actually asking for? You do need a lot of help. So what are you doing to get that help, whether it's from the outside world or establishing the institutions inside the country? We know what the problems are, but it doesn't seem like anything's actually physically being done.
I think that's the job of the particular ministries, namely the health ministry, the Ministry of Health, but also the NGOs. I mean, there is a good number of NGOs now that have sprung up. I mean, the latest calculation in Benghazi, there are more than 700 of them. And I'm sure there are a good number of them. They look after these. And these NGOs, they need to be connected with NGOs that deal or have dealt with similar cases somewhere else. And they need to be helped. I think it's unfair to expect the NTC to be to do the magical things that everyone cannot do. You know?
But no one is. I think a lot of people are quite realistic in what to expect from the NTC.
Well, the NTC in managing Libya post-Gaddafi, I think they've done a hell of a good job as compared to the Americans in Iraq post-Saddam. So we must give them credit for what they've done. I think they've managed to put the country together. They've set an agenda. They're sticking by it, and they're handing authorities hopefully in June once the National Council is elected, and they want to go home. So I don't think we should really expect that much from them. These are old age problems, some of these problems that we have. And also on the top of this, we have these new problems, the men with arms, raped women, lawlessness and so on. And I think it's unfair just to, by the way, I'm no supporter of the NTC. I mean, I've criticized them so many times in Libya when I was there. And I think they could do better.
But what are you offering? Alternatively, what are you offering?
Well, this is I think
as someone who's active.
Yeah, I think this is something that we need to do collectively. We Libyans, but also the regional powers, the Arab world, but also our friends in the north, the West and so on, and we need to come together to deal with some, serious human problems. I think the rape is a one that really makes my night sleepless. This is something that we need to worry about.
Something that I found very striking in Tripoli after the fall of the regime, and I think a lot of other people did too, was an extraordinary explosion of goodwill, of civil society, of people doing things, whether it was cleaning the streets or forming organizations, for the first time ever in most people's lifetimes. I think the questions that you raise are interesting, because how do you actually channel all that energy and all that goodwill into things that will make a difference? Let's take another round of questions if we can, please. There's
Hi. There's been much in the press recently about the sort of Islamification of North Africa, and with reference to Libya, there's been much about Abdul Hakim Belhaj and Ali Salabi, etc. And I wondered whether you forecasted a repeat of the elections in Tunisia and Egypt for Libya in 20 months' time, or whether you feel that Islamist politics doesn't have much sway in the country.
Thank you.
There was a strong regional tribal component to the civil war in Libya, and I'd like to know how that may be solved, what the possibilities are for building a country subsequent to that. And also, all dictatorship leaves a mark on its people. You don't make people democrats overnight when those freedoms have been stifled. Democracy is in the mind, freedom is in the mind. A Libyan friend of mine, who had been involved in reforming elements and working at a distance, but with the Gaddafi regime, who I met recently, told me he thought it would take 3 to 4 years just to get back to where Libya was. I think he was talking about infrastructure, about just making the country work. And this is a difficult question. It's probably easier to talk about the infrastructure, how you can get the country back to a functioning, water, all those sorts of things. But your estimate on that, but also on getting people to live externally, what I think they lived internally, which was, like most dictatorships, people can talk internally, they talk with their family and their friends, but how can that be expressed outside in a long-term sustainable way, rather than that initial euphoria of we have freedom and then the long hard road rebuilds to actually create a functioning state. And I'm sorry, I don't want to ask too many questions, but how all of this fits into what is happening in the rest of the Maghreb, which is undergoing a process of change also. Intra-regional coordination hasn't been the Maghreb's strongest point, if I can put it that way. But to work better as a region, it needs to work more closely together. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. A lady here, please.
Hi, it's Alex Wally-Winter from XRI News. I was interested in what you said about people not being paid. Also, there's some people saying there's no money. And I also know the IMF said most assets were unfrozen on 16th of December. So what is actually going on with people's pay? I hear people in government even aren't being paid. What is the system for that?
Thank you very much. So 3 very sharp and focused questions there. The Islamist politics, Belhaj and so on. The tribal question in Libya that people, I'm surprised we got this far without having heard about it before, and money. So let's have a round on those, please, if you will. Whoever wants to go first.
Can I comment on the Islamic
element?
The Libyans, as a conservative Muslim country, most people are Muslims, and during the 42 years of Gaddafi, the country, it was already a conservative society, but it became more closed society. And this encouraged people to become more conservative and to resort to Islam, because there was no other avenue for people to go to. I mean, only God can help us, because Gaddafi was just so brutal in his approach to people's demands, and he was ruining the country. So when this revolution started, and of course Libya was influenced by what was going on around the world, and the Islamization which took place, as I said, in the 80s and 90s affected Libya a great deal. And actually Gaddafi created the perfect fertile ground for extremists to emerge from Libya. And a lot of Libyans, although it's a small population, they did go to fight all over the world for Islamic causes. When this revolution started, the most organized people, actually, among the Libyans were the Islamists. And because they have been, and especially the ones who lived abroad, but also the ones who managed to sustain a presence secretly within Libya. So they had an infrastructure of organization, of planning, of executing things. And so when the revolution started, a lot of them took advantage of that. Of course, they did not. It's not the Islamists who did the revolution. It was all the Libyans, and especially the young Libyans, the ones who were in their 20s and 30s. They're the ones who saw no hope of Gaddafi. I mean, the oldest, my generation, the ones in the late 40s and 50s, they got used to living under Gaddafi. But the young people, with the opening of the internet, the age of the internet, satellite television, people started to see the world, to have a different perspective. And this encouraged them to, I mean, it's the wall of fear which collapsed with Tunisia and Egypt, which helped Libyans. Without Tunisia and Egypt, I don't think it could have happened. But this now, the situation is, these Islamic groups or Islamic personalities or organizations, they are the ones who are taking the most advantage of the chaotic situation. Of course, the NTC is doing a lot, but the NTC only controls about 10% of the army that exists in Libya today. The rest is in Zantan, is in Misrata, is in the hands of many other people. And actually, the Islamists today are the ones. The Islamists, when I say the Islamists, I mean the ones who have an Islamic agenda to rule Libya according to Sharia law without respect for human rights. And I think Tunisia had an Islamic government which made sure that in the constitution that they respect these rights. In Egypt, they were forced to put down in the constitution that they respect these rights. In theory, that is, but the practice of this time will tell, but I think experiences around the world show that stringent measures of observing these freedoms have to be in place, otherwise they will be abused and they will be reversed.
Ahmed, what do you think about the question of Islamists in the new Libya? Is it something you're concerned about?
I'll come to answer this question, but let me first comment on what Mr. Abu Shagur said regarding the army under the NTC's control. He's saying 10% only of the fighters or the army under. I don't think this is a very accurate.
I read it. It's reported.
Maybe could we stick with the question? I mean, we have people asking specific questions. I think it would be good to try to answer.
Okay, very quickly, because only 3 brigades now are not under the NTC's control. 1 brigade, not Misrata brigade, 1 brigade from Misrata, Zantan brigade, Towada Trablus brigade. The rest are under the NTC authority, and the NTC is bringing everybody under its umbrella. The Islamist groups, they vary in Libya from the far extreme to the modern Islamic groups. And we have also secular groups in Libya. But I think the over majority of Libyan people are not for extreme Islamic groups, neither are they for secular groups. They are modern Muslim, and I don't think there would be any, or we shouldn't be scared of the future of Libya or the future of the role of the Islamic groups in Libya. There was 2 other questions actually we didn't answer before. One was about, I think, what the NTC should be doing at this stage. And I think the priority for the NTC now is to raise the awareness among the Libyan people, educate them about their rights and their duties, educate them about the values of the country they dream of, because this is democracy, justice, tolerance. This is what they need to know about now at this stage before they go and cast their votes. Also, there was another question whether we are optimistic or not. I myself am very optimistic, and the reason is the sequence of the event have taken place in Libya since the beginning of the revolution. I'll name few There are many, but I'll name few. For example, when the revolution, or before the revolution started, everybody in Libya and outside Libya was expecting that it would be a chaos in Libya, there would be looting, there would be instability in the country. Those people are not familiar with democracy, and they don't have political parties, they are not organized, they don't have civil society. It didn't happen. Few days after the fall of the eastern part of the country, it was very stable, it was under the NTC's control, and the NTC itself, it was formed, and everybody expected again, the NTC will not be accepted by the majority of the Libyan people, but it was. It received large support of the population in Libya, in the eastern part as well as in the western part, without any international intervention, without any foreign assistance. And during the revolution, the same thing happened. The Libyan people showed a lot of responsibility, and they supported the NTC all over that period. After the fall of Tripoli, or before the fall of Tripoli, everybody was waiting to see a bloodshed in Tripoli. It didn't happen. And then the constitution, or the constitutional declaration, the NTC managed to form a government within the timetable they have, and the declaration was also announced in the same day. So all these events promise us that we will be there. We are not quite there, but we will be there.
Okay, thank you. So we've still got questions outstanding on the tribal issue, the return of infrastructure. How long is that going to take? And a very precise question about why aren't people being paid? I remember that $165 billion worth of Libyan assets were unfrozen very recently. There shouldn't be a shortage of cash. So can we look at those questions?
Do you want me to deal with the tribal one?
Please.
Yeah. Well, as Ahmed said, everyone thought that it's going to be a tribal mayhem. It's going to be a tribal unrest. Tribes will just take up arms and just fight each other. Luckily, that did not happen. It did happen in the past, a long time ago, 100 or 200 years ago, but not this time. As a matter of fact, the tribes rallied behind the mainstream revolution. However, there were tribes that were seen as pro-Gaddafi, namely Warfella. But for those who do not know Warfella, Warfella is supposed to be the largest tribe in Libya. 45% of it lives in the east, so that's pro-revolution. Only 10% live in Banu Walid. Actually, there are more Warfella members in Misrata than there are in Banu Walid, and the rest are spread throughout the country. So the tribal unrest that was anticipated never materialized. But this is not to say that it might come back and loom over Libya much later, especially when we have elections. If we do not have a proper, pronounced political parties representing the views of the masses. So this can be an issue. But I didn't see tribes and tribalism in the short term, in the very foreseeable future, as being problematic to Libya. And I'm talking from authority. I've written a book on tribes and tribalism in Libya, and I know how the dynamics of tribes. But also we saw the sad assassination of Brigadier General Abdel Fattah Yunus, who happens to belong to one of it's actually the biggest tribe in the east of the country. And lots of people thought that his tribe would come in and just invade Benghazi and revenge his killing and so on. But this never happened. They behaved in a very civil manner. They stuck to the mainstream, and they left it to the authorities, who have not done much about his in bringing his killers to justice. But at least tribe in here did comply or go along with the aspiration of the rest of the nation.
I remember people telling me that there was some resentment quite quickly that members of the NTC and official positions were being. There was too many jobs were going to people from the Warfala that you've mentioned. Is that not an issue, or has it gone?
Before or now?
No.
No. Well, this is a grudge was against Mahmoud Gibril in particular.
Yeah, because
I mean, very few of us knew that Mahmoud Gibril, he belonged to that tribe. And I must say, the man, even though I disagree with him, but he never marketed himself as a Warfella man. He always marketed himself as a strategist, or that jargon that he uses. But his opponents used this against him because, especially the opponents of Warfella, tried to smear the tribe and they tried to brand them as Gaddafi loyalists. But obviously from the statistics that we have, but also from the what they've done for the revolution, in no way they are allied to the regime. Yes, there are thugs of them allied to Gaddafi. So were thugs from Benghazi, for example. Don't forget that the man who stood by Gaddafi to the last minute was from Benghazi, General Abu Bakr Yunus Jaber. So it's unfair to say this or that or the other tribe is allied to this man or to that. No, it isn't.
Can I disagree with Frajo on this? Because all Libyans know that Warfella was privileged in the 70s and the 80s especially, until 1993, until the coup attempt in 1993 from Warfella to topple Gaddafi. Warfellans, Gaddafi used tribal allegiances and bestowing benefits and money to many tribes. But Warfellans, proportionally, they had more, maybe similar to Mgarha and Sirte, Gdadfa. So definitely there was a grudge. I lived in Tripoli and I know this for a fact. Lots of the top positions, especially in security, especially in but I want to comment on the money issue very quickly. Just last week, the Deputy Prime Minister, who happens to be my cousin, he said $800 million or euros, I'm not sure, were spent treating the injured, or went under the budget of treating the injured from the revolution. And he said only 10 to 15% of that money was actually spent on real injured. Most of the rest of the money was squandered on people's cronies and relatives and all that. So imagine that amount of money. And that's actually when I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of reports of people smuggling money and big corruption on a big scale. And I think law and order, I think one of the people asked about this earlier. This is extremely important, which is lacking at this minute. The streets, of course, the streets are, in a situation like this, in another country, maybe it could have been worse. But at this time, in Tripoli, maybe Benghazi, I stayed in Benghazi for 3 months. Benghazi was much safer, much more easier to get around. But at night, people are fearing for their lives. They don't go out much at night. And that's not Tripoli.
Now, we're very rapidly running out of time. Are there a couple more very quick questions and with very quick answers from the panel? The lady over here and the guy over there, and I think that'll be it, please.
Hi, I just wanted to bring up the issue of missing people. I know that now there's an office of that actually separates between the martyrs and the missing, who were assumed to be pro-Gaddafi. And coming from Cyprus myself, where there was a lot of missing people, and knowing how politicized it was, not only nationally for politicians in my own country, but internationally for international organizations to come out, I'd like to know what kind of cohesive national identity measures are being taken by the new government.
I'd just like to ask a factual question. What election system was decided on in the end? Because it's a very critical question to the extent, with regard to the extent to which political parties are going to play a role in the forthcoming elections. And second question, we've heard about the SWAR, but who now represents the social revolution, the unarmed revolutionaries? And I know this is a license, but just a last comment on women's role. Women actually played a critical role in the revolution in very many ways. And hearing about how women, civil society activists in Benghazi mobilized to database and feed vulnerable families in Benghazi perhaps explains some of the social resilience and the reasons why Libya has remained relatively stable in a very challenging situation.
Thank you very much. So please, if you'd like to address those points and maybe make some final comments, then we have to wrap it up. So missing people, the electoral system, and the social revolutionaries who are being overlooked.
Maybe just brief comment on missing people. I mean, my colleague, she met with the ministry, I think 10 days ago. The situation is still very much, in early stages. The data are still being gathered on the number of people who are missing. I mean, also the number of people who died for whatever reason in the conflict is not clear. So there are still mass graves which are being discovered. So in that respect, I think we'll have to wait for some more while. I wanted to make one more comment on the issue which was raised earlier and also addressed tribalism. I think I agree that sometimes the tribal issue is overestimated. But from our perspective, we've also noticed that in a situation where there is no rule of law yet, it can be also very dangerous that people are perceived to be someone because they belong to a certain city, to a certain tribe or what other group. So many of you probably know about the tension between Towada and Misrata for obvious reasons, because the city of Misrata was bombed from Towada and other neighboring cities. And but now, as a consequence, now there are so-called militias, Thawar, who are targeting particularly people, all people, one could say, from that city. And you can find that also in the Nafusa Mountains, that people from tribes who are seen that they are, that they have been affiliated with a past regime or loyalists, that they're targeted. And we've spoken to people who said, but I was even, with the revolutionaries, and now I'm targeted. Now, they took me in and, beat me. So this is also dangerous. This kind of thinking needs to be changed, I would say.
The missing, it's another problem that we need to deal with. And I don't know how we're going to deal with this, because there are mothers and wives who are still waiting. I mean, take the example, for example, those prisoners who were massacred in 1996. One of them, he was my schoolmate, and I met his mother just about 3-4 months ago.
This is Abu Salim, right?
Abu Salim, yeah. 1,270 men were killed. And his mother refuses the fact that her son died. And she said, I want to see his remains, and we don't know where they are. And during this revolution, there are lots of people where they just vanished. So it's a serious problem. I don't know how we're going to tackle this. As for women, after all, this revolution started by women, because men planned the revolution for the 17th, but women couldn't wait, and they're the ones who came out around this time in Benghazi, on the 15th of February, and they're the ones who agitated everyone, and they just captured the imagination of everyone, and the revolution rolled on from there. And they played a very fundamentally critical role in the revolution and the execution of the revolution. They're the ones who were urging the menfolk. They're the ones who were sending the sons and husbands and brothers and so on. I, as one who has 9 sisters, we know what women mean. But it's sad to see them. Let me just say, self-sidelined, but also men playing part in this. They're not really playing the pivotal role that they played in the outset of the revolution. They taken the passenger seat rather than the driver's seat, and we need to encourage women to come forth and to be the leaders as they were, and they were very effective leaders in the execution of the revolution.
Thank you.
Can I say a lasting comment?
Please, last comment from Khairi, please.
I mean, as someone who lived the last 30 years of my life in exile, away because of Gaddafi, I couldn't be happier to see him go. And mainly because there was no respect for human rights in Libya. And that's why we campaigned to attract support of the international community, to support the Libyans so they can have their human rights respected again. The missing thing which I can't see and I'm not seeing done enough about in Libya today by the NTC, by the government, there's a lot of goodwill initiatives and people trying to do their best with the little, with as much or as little they have to talk about the human rights and to promote human rights. But I think the NTC and the government should have, and the international community should put a lot of pressure on the Libyan authorities to make human rights top of the agenda, more important, as important as security of the people.
Harry, thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. I'm sure you'll want to thank them in the usual way, but also just to add that Rana's book is here on display. I guess she'll be happy to sign it and to whatever else, and maybe even sell it to you after the event. So thank you very much, everybody, for your.